Hey everyone, this is Don. In this episode of The Naturalist, I'm going to talk about the connection between bourbon whiskey and trees. So let's go. Buffalo Trace Distillery takes its name from the giant herds of buffalo that used to roam Kentucky, or bison. There were millions of bison that would have lived here in the bluegrass region, grazing, creating open pasture-like prairie lands and savannas. And so Buffalo Trace is named in honor of those things, and the trace name is just another word for trail. So a trace would be a giant migratory route or trail that buffalo or bison would have used. And so Buffalo Trace is on the national historic landmark, okay, because of its exceptional historical features that it possesses, and the nature of the campus, where you can see all parts of the distilling and brewing industry, and in a beautiful historical campus. All right, so today's episode is all about the connection, particularly between bourbon making and trees or wood, particularly white oak wood. And I'll throw in a few tidbits here and there as well, but let's go. And on this trip as well, this episode as well, we'll hear from tour guide Jackson, who I appreciate allowing me to film as he spoke. All right, so let's take a walk. That's the iconic water tower at Buffalo Trace. I think it holds 150,000 gallons of water, but I think it's mostly defunct, according to our tour guide. And it's mostly for decoration and advertisement, but it's pretty cool nonetheless. And of course, you need a water tank in the area, any areas where you're distilling liquor, because the chance of fire is pretty high, right? So among all the other water needs you might have at the plant. So that's the iconic tower. This is the branding shed at Buffalo Trace. Let's just poke our head in for the moment, but we're going to hear a lot about this place from our tour guide Jackson in just a moment. We'll learn about barrels, their construction, and various aspects of barrels, more than you'd think you'd need to know about barrels that go into bourbon.
All the barrels that you see around here, we were actually talking about that they're all American white oak. That's the only kind of barrel we use here at the distillery. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you guys look in the back, you're going to see that sign that says barrel receiving and inspection. That's what we're going to be getting all of our barrels. No longer do we get them via train, we get them on trucks. We get anywhere from 2 to 5 trucks per day. Each truck has 288 barrels on it. As those barrels get unloaded off the truck, we're going to put it on a conveyor belt system. That conveyor belt has a high-tech laser. It's going to scan the outside of the barrel, make sure it doesn't have any cracks, so they're on the stage of the barrel that could cause leakage. After it has been inspected and approved, it is going to go down this line, and eventually when we open back up on Monday, you see the right-hand side, there's that green door. The barrels are going to move through that door, and they're heading over to our cistern room, which is our next stop. Cistern room is where we fill up our barrels with 53 gallons of our premium White Dog. We'll talk more about White Dog. We'll talk more about White Dog when we get there. But again, while we're in here, I want to tell us a little bit about what makes our barrels special. So this is about half of an American white oak tree. This will make up about 1 barrel. And again, we're only using American white oak for all of our different bourbons. You can use any kind of oak to make a bourbon. However, American white oak is what we've been using since 1800s, and it's been proven to make the tastiest bourbons. So after we get this tree, we're bringing it over to the Cumberland Cooperage in East Bernstadt, Kentucky. We own that cooperage. We're the only distillery that owns their own cooperage and makes their own barrels. So we're going to cut this up into planks, as you can see here. Those planks need to be shaped to make sure that they can fit the shape of a barrel. So we're going to steam them and give them this little curve you see here, and then 32 of those staves are going to all be put together. We're going to put the rings on the outside of the barrel, and finally the barrel starts to take a shape that you're pretty familiar with. The next step is one of the most important in the process. As I pass this around, I want you to look at the black interior of the barrel. That is what we call the number 4 char, or the alligator skin char. It's 55 seconds of an open flame on the inside of the barrel. The reason why we char the inside of our wood is to not only provide that amber color that you guys like so much, but it's also to help caramelize the wood sugars inside the barrel. One of the many things, I'll mention this in a second, one of the many things that makes bourbon different from whiskey is you can't add any flavorings or colorings to it. Where we get the flavoring inside of our bourbon actually physically comes from the barrel. Do we have any people who really like wine here? Wine drinkers, yeah. You guys know what tannins are? Very similar. We're working with tannins and balanins and lignans and all these other things, wood sugars that make your bourbon taste like caramel, vanilla, toasted marshmallows, whatever else you want to say. Right? Now, the last thing I want to mention, if you have a stave in your hands, or I'll show you guys, you'll see that on the inside there is the red line, or the bourbon line. How far the bourbon actually seeps into the wood of the barrel. See that? Remember I mentioned whenever it opens up, the bourbon goes in the wood? That's how we can tell it went in the wood. Isn't that cool? Alright. I'd love some stuff out, so you ask me questions, because you guys seem like the question-y crowd. So,
how long can you use a barrel?
How many times can we use a barrel?
Once.
Once. We can legally only use a barrel in order to make bourbon once. Scotch, Irish whiskey, Canadian whiskey, they'll use a barrel anywhere from 6 to 9 times, roughly. Once we're done with ours for the first time, it's got to be sold off for a secondary purpose. Big one right now for us is tequila down in Mexico. If you ever heard of Corazon tequila, they use our bourbon barrels. We also do send some barrels over to Jameson. In the gift shop, you'll find bourbon barrel aged hot sauce and salsa and maple syrup and all kinds of things. Right?
Is that a bourbon requirement or is that a requirement of your distillery?
That is a bourbon requirement. So in 1964, Congress was in charge of defining exactly what makes a bourbon different from whiskey. And the main reason why is because they wanted to make bourbon the national spirit. The first rule that you should know about bourbon is it has to be made in the United States. You can't make it anywhere else, right? And so they put in a bunch of extra rules to make bourbon more complicated and different to make from whiskey. The main one is that bourbon's 51% what? Corn, just to be considered a bourbon. It has to be in a new charred oak barrel every single time. No flavorings or colorings. Has to be made in America. A couple other ones that are really complicated, like it has to go into the barrel no higher than 125, come off the still no higher than 160, and then go into the bottle no lower than 80. Those are majority of the rules, unless I miss one. Great. Any other questions? I like questions. I hope you know that. I'm not trying to rush through your questions. They're my favorite part of the tour.
Reforestation for all the wood?
Yeah, I've heard a couple things about it. So I know we own a plot of land in the Ozarks, and every time we take a tree, we plant some as well. These trees take, I was actually told by an arborist, it takes roughly 35 to 40 years to grow one of these trees. And so we've been doing this for a while, at least since the 80s. And so my guess is that we're either coming close or we have cut down trees that we grew back then. So that's my guess, and again, it's not a scientific thing, but that's what my guess is.
How automated is the position of the barrel in the warehouses as far as being able to look on a computer and say barrel 101 is at this location?
It's all on the computers. You're right. It used to not be. Back in 1992, it was all kept by hand. There were roughly about 700,000 barrels that were kept by hand here on site, which was rough. So now that we have 1.7 million barrels here on site, we do have an automated system that lets us know about batches, about dates, about times, about when the barrel is supposed to come out. A lot of that is controlled by our samplers. So people who come in and they take samples of the barrels while they're in the warehouse. I would say that I don't know if they would be able to look up and be like, where is the Pappy Van Winkle 23? Or, but they know that there is a wheated bourbon that's 23 years old, and they get an alert that's like, it's time to come out of the warehouse, or at least take a sample of it. So, pretty automated. Great. Well, if we don't have any other questions, our next stop, we're going to go through the sliding door, take a right. We're going to go see the cistern room, which is where we fill up our barrels. Yeah. Yes.
Are those made here? They have to be made here if they're...
Yeah, because they're American. Yeah. So, I didn't want to get into this early, but I won't mention it. That's fine.
Behind me is one of the warehouses or rick houses where they stack the barrels during the aging process. So there are multiple levels to this building. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 stories. And of course multiple layers of barrels within each story there. And different distillers will do different things. Because the aging process proceeds differently depending on whether the barrel's near the bottom of the house versus the top of the house, where it's warmer and there are higher temperature fluctuations. Some distillers will rotate barrels around the house to kind of expose them to roughly similar conditions throughout the aging process. Buffalo Trace keeps theirs in place. All right, so the ones that near the bottom, say they age for 10 years, they are receiving a different aging regime than the ones in place for 10 years near the top. Okay, where it gets both hotter and colder during the process. All right, so there are numerous warehouses on the campus here. This is one, across the way is another, and you know, they're all around. So these big buildings that look like dormitories or campus apartment buildings are indeed apartments for whiskey.
I was built in the 1930s. It was the biggest warehouse to ever be built back in the 1930s. It holds just under 50,000 barrels. How much does a barrel weigh?
500.
Right around 500 pounds. There's just under 50,000. This building's almost 100 years old, and you're at the very bottom. So don't freak out. First thing I want you to do is reach up and touch a barrel. Not that one.
Look at that.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah, I saw that.
Now you can say you touched a real Buffalo Trace barrel. Wow. Isn't that amazing? If you guys don't mind, go ahead and look above you. You'll see how there are spaces in between the planks, right? That's because all the heat that would gather up down here rises to the very top of your warehouse. So down here, it's nice and cool. You felt that temperature difference, right? Mm-hmm. Nice and cool means we can age bourbons down here longer. Where at the top of the warehouse, it's about 100, 110 degrees up there right now, which means we have to age barrels up there for less amount of time. That's kind of how we're able to influence the different flavors in our taste profile, is we're putting them in different parts of the warehouse that have different temperatures, different airflows, different light levels, right? What we call microclimates inside the distillery. Now down here is where we're going to be aging all of our oldest products, anything from 10 to 23 years. Anybody know why we have to age all of our old products at the coldest part of the warehouse? What we're worried about?
Evaporation.
Evaporation, exactly right. What we call the angel share process inside the warehouse. Whenever it gets hot, remember that barrel expands, the bourbon goes in the wood, it also opens up pores of the wood that allow for that alcohol to evaporate out. So where we fill it up at 53 gallons, you know, we might take it out of the warehouse and it's only half full. Because we lose anywhere from 2 to 5% of our total product every year inside the barrel. 1.7 million barrels, each barrel loses 2 to 5% every year. After 23 years, you know, you're lucky to get 10 gallons out of it. It's 53 gallons that starts out, you know. So you lose a lot over time. Now, again, middle of the warehouse where we age all of our 6 to 9 year product, excuse me. And the top of the warehouse is where we age things about 2 to 5 years. So all of our young stuff comes up there. Down here is Eagle Rare, Eagle 12, Pappy Van Winkle, Eagle 17, George T. Stagg, all the NC collection, things like that. Middle of the warehouse is Buffalo Trace, the majority of the Wellers, other than the Weller 12. Top of the warehouse is Benchmark and H&H. I've said that name a couple times. Does anybody know what Benchmark actually is? You guys ever had it?
Yes.
It's great. It got me through college. It's wonderful. You should try some. But it's a little bit younger, right? Now again, when I mention microclimates, there are all of these things that affect how a barrel ages. So, for example, barrels that are sitting out here on the outside are going to get more airflow because it's closer to the door. And there's a barrel that's sitting right here next to the window, and so it's going to get more light than the barrel that's in the middle that doesn't see light its entire lifetime. Barrels that are positioned on the bottom actually get more airflow on the bottom of the barrel because there's a faux basement down there. See, there's a fake basement. Kind of regulates air better, right? All of these small little things that you don't really expect affects what a barrel tastes like. Not only that, we're able to concentrate on different flavors by putting them in certain places. With a batch bourbon, it's more common to have a big rung of these barrels that tastes a lot like vanilla, and then a big rung of another set of barrels that tastes like caramel. And then when you batch them together, you get the vanilla caramel flavor of Buffalo Trace. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. Right? Now with a single barrel bourbon, again, that's very special because it has to sit in one certain part of the warehouse under the exact amount of time and conditions and everything to meet that taste profile. So that's why a lot of our single barrel bourbons are more sought after for that reason. Question, I see it.
You know, I just,
go ahead.
David, talking about water, how's that affecting here?
We are testing every single one of our barrels that were affected by the flood. There were a lot of them that were affected. It's going to take us a long time to test every single barrel. I haven't got any numbers about whether we have lost any barrels or we gained barrels. No, we just lost barrels. Or we've had to trash them or whatever else it may be. So once I get those numbers, I'd be happy to tell you, but they haven't told me. Remember, those barrels have met the exact taste profile of land. They have sat in a certain part of the warehouse. They've been selected. And so we are going to individually dump them in a big copper tank. We're going to add water to that tank and we're going to proof it down to the exact right proof. The blends that you buy in the gift shop, like the one that you see in these white boxes here, those are 93 proof. So we're going to add enough water to make sure it's 93. Then it's going to come down this line where we're going to fill up the bottles, we're going to cork the bottles, we're going to wax them, put the labels on the bottles, hand write the date on those bottles, put them in a box, put them on a pallet, ship them off everywhere. All of that process is hand done here on site. We don't do any automation in this room. And so that's how we were doing it back in the 1980s, and we don't plan to stop anytime soon. It's one of the things that we believe brings character to the blends. Right. Now, if you notice all these blends that are lined up here, if you didn't already know, they have a horse on top. That horse, there are 8 different varieties of horses that you can collect. If you collect them all, you make a Kentucky horse race. See how they all have different positions? Not only can you tell the difference just based on the positions, you can look in the bottom right corner, you'll see a letter. It spells out blends. B-L-A-N-T-O-N-S. Very cool. Blends.
Anytime you visit a distillery, you're going to see plants, trees, walls, posts, buildings covered with this black soot-like substance. All right, so you can see this plant is a viburnum, an ornamental viburnum, and it's coated with this black velvety coating. Now, what is that? Well, that's called whiskey fungus, Bourbon compneacensis, and it's all over the shrubs here. So what is it? What is whiskey fungus? Here's a tree that's just coated with it on the bark. All right. So here it's very thick and crust-like. Okay, it can grow to maybe be a centimeter thick in some places. So what this is a fungus that is living on the alcohol vapor that has settled on these structures, on these plants, on these buildings, on these posts. And it's basically eating the angel's share, if you will. Okay, there's a lot of volatile organic compounds, including ethanol, coming out of these warehouses, these aging structures, just the whole distilling process itself, and that stuff will settle in the area, and this fungus thrives on that. Now, as you can see, it's not really a pathogen, it's not a plant pathogen. It's not supposedly harmful to human health. It's more of a nuisance. Okay, and so you know, these plants still grow through this, but you could bet that that plant is not growing as fast as it would because some of the sunlight is blocked, impeding photosynthesis in a plant like this. So this fungus is a little bit more of a nuisance than a health concern, but nonetheless, it can be problematic. People can get angry about it, especially if you live near a distillery. I'm also noticing that some plants really accumulate it, like these viburnum shrubs here, but other plants nearby really don't. Okay, so here are leaves of a maple tree where the bark is dark and clearly the fungus is thriving on the bark, but the leaves are not very covered by it. So that could have something to do with the chemistry of the tree preventing the growth of the fungus, but clearly on those viburnum leaves the fungus is thriving. It doesn't need plants though, right? Because it'll grow even on this painted metal post here, which is, I'm directly under the water tower at Buffalo Trace. All right, so it's not feeding on a plant or anything, it's feeding on the alcohol that has settled on this structure here that was generated through the aging process, volatilizing out of the barrels. All right, so that's whiskey fungus. Here's a red bud coated in whiskey fungus, but this one unfortunately has a fungus that's not good for it. It's cool, kind of cool. This is called a red-belted polypore. All right, it's called a polypore because the underside of these fungi do not have gills, they have pores. This has a really smooth, almost varnish-like appearance to the top. So that's the red-belted polypore, and that is rotting out the center of this tree, unfortunately. Okay, so when you see those on a tree, they're cool, they're really interesting. Here's one coming off the roots. It's actually not a good sign for the tree. As we learned in the branding house, white oak is preferentially used in barrel making for whiskey production. Why is that? Why can't you use other woods, perhaps that are cheaper and easier to grow? Well, white oak has a kind of structure in the wood that makes it good for barrel making barrels that don't leak. So white oak wood has something in it called tyloses. And these are structures that grow into the cells of their vascular tissue and basically prevent leakage of the vascular tissue. So it's a very dense wood. It's not very porous, unlike say red oak, which is much more porous. And so it makes a good tight barrel that doesn't leak very much, okay? Still does slightly, right? There's still alcohol that evaporates from a barrel, but it's not a great amount. Now, interestingly, the tree here that was planted in dedication in honor of white oak is not truly just your typical white oak, Quercus alba. I don't know if they realize this here, but what they have planted here is a swamp white oak. Okay, with these leaves and a whitish underside. So their dedicated tree here is a swamp white oak and not your typical, what you might call American white oak, Quercus alba. The tree in front of us here is a beautiful tree. Of course, the bark's covered by whiskey fungus. But this is a pin oak, and pin oak would not make good barrels because pin oak has a ring porous structure to the wood. It would make a much more leaky barrel. The other thing about it is its tannin profile would be much different than white oak. It would be much more intense, actually. Tannin, it would make a more tanniny bourbon than white oak would because it's just higher in content, and sort of the kinds of tannins that you'd find in the wood. Okay, but here's a beautiful pin oak, but it would not make a good whiskey barrel. Behind me is a little monument dedicated to bison as well, or buffalo. This is a bison carved from a single block of limestone, according to the signage. And this is Thunder. Apparently there was a wooden bison statue here on the campus, and this was created and installed in 2017 to replace the previous wooden structure. This thing weighs 9,200 pounds. It's a single block of limestone. It's pretty awesome. And it's solid. Now, a real bison wouldn't weigh that much, but they probably weighed close to 800,000 pounds, I would guess. I could check that. But that's Thunder. One point I'd like to make today is that bourbon is essentially a tree extract. What you're seeking in bourbon is not just the alcohol. There's white alcohol that starts the process. It's pretty flavorless and colorless. And if we left it at that, you know, you'd get the alcohol aspect of bourbon without ever going through this process. So what is the process of making bourbon doing for that? It's adding flavor. It's adding texture, if you will. It's adding color. All of those things come from wood. They come from white oak wood in particular. So here we're talking about phenolics of various sorts primarily, but other sugars and things like that, compounds that are in the wood, primarily there as defenses and microbial inhibitors in terms of the tree itself, that the alcohol extracts slowly through time, okay? And as the alcohol gets sucked into the wood, it extracts these phenolics and other compounds and then pulls them back out into the liquid fraction in the barrel. And so essentially the aging process is just this slow process of the alcohol slowly pulling out extratives from the wood to provide all the things that we like about bourbon, the color, the flavor, and texture. And so in reality, bourbon is nothing more than an extract of white oak. Think about that the next time you drink it.